Hello and welcome. I am Thomas Porteous and you are watching The World Report. Let's have a look at some news from Ukraine. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky said that Ukraine would need to fight in New Year to bolster its position against Russia. Zelensky's New Year address caps a difficult year for the war-battered country. As per the AFP analysis, Ukraine has lost 7 times more territory in 2024 than in 2023. The European country is also facing the possibility of a reduction in the US Army and political backing as Donald Trump takes over the White House. The Republican has said he will end the conflict in 24 hours once in power. It raises the fear that in Ukraine that it will be forced to give up all the land that the Kremlin currently controls in exchange for peace. Amidst this situation, Zelensky vowed to use the new year 2025 to end Russia's nearly 3-year-long invasion of his country. This comes just after a Ukrainian drone shot down a Russian helicopter. Thank you for joining us. We have with us our reporter Aditya Wadwan. Aditya, what are some recent updates in this ever-growing conflict?
Well, as you write, Tom, what has happened is, the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has said that, the Ukraine will have to fight war on the battlefield as well as it is an all-out war for Ukraine. I mean, there is no possible solution to this war as of now. On one hand, Russian President Vladimir Putin has been saying that he was ready to compromise on war and he will hold talks with the US President Donald Trump once he assumes office on 20th January. But it is very unlikely because on one hand, Putin says that he is ready to make compromises on the Ukraine war on the position of strength, not on weakness, and on the other hand, he is retaliating retaliating to the Ukrainian drone attack on the Russian city. So the situation is very complex, and it needs to be monitored very carefully. Yes, Tom, back to you in the studios.
Thank you very much, Aditya, for that. We are joined by Glenn Grant, former advisor to Defense Minister of Ukraine, who is currently in Kiev. Glenn Grant, we have obviously getting constant news from the whole situation that a negotiation might be in progress, but then things seem to escalate further. What's happening with it? Madhav Nalaput, we are also joined by Madhav Nalaput, the editorial director of the TSG. Can I pitch the same question to you? The fact that negotiations seem to be coming, but no sign of them yet.
Well, I'd like to say that President Zelensky has done immense harm to his country and to his people by carrying on with a war that was doomed from the very beginning, quite frankly. The Western world has been cheering on Ukraine against Russia, and every hour that passes, more Ukrainians are paying the price in human lives. Ukraine is paying the price in terms of lost territory and lost property. The fact of the matter is that the Indian stand has been very clear from 2022, early 2022 onwards, which is that the war needs to end soonest. And frankly, that is the only way out for the people of Ukraine to salvage what is left of their country. So I think Zelensky, frankly, is living in a fantasy world, or he is talking as though he's living in a fantasy world. There is no question of Ukraine getting back the territory that is lost to Russia. There's no question of that. It's not going to happen, no matter how strong the Western support. And as you correctly said, in the United States, Donald Trump has made it clear he's not going to waste taxpayer dollars on Ukraine when there are far more pressing matters at home.
Many people would say that this would be a counter-surrendering for Ukraine. Would this be a loss for the Ukrainian side?
Look, I want to say very clearly that there are certain realities that have to be faced. And the reality is that from 2012 onwards, 2014 actually, the Russian-speaking areas of Ukraine have been separated from Ukraine. And that is going to continue. And when you compare Ukraine and Russia, the disproportion is so huge. There's no way Ukraine can get them back, and there's no way, short of entering the war directly, that NATO can help Ukraine get involved. And if NATO enters the war directly, well, that has consequences, including on Western public opinion. You've seen all the leaders in Western countries who have supported this war are one by one falling by the wayside. You have Boris Johnson, you have Biden, you have Scholz, you have Macron. They're all falling by the wayside. And you're getting a Ukraine skeptic such as Giorgia Meloni come to power. You're getting people like Viktor Orban getting a hearing for the first time. So I would like to request my friends in the West, please join India in ending this senseless war and stop the suffering that is going on of the Ukrainian people. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madhav Nalaput, for that. We will now look at some news from the Middle East. Repeated Israeli attacks on hospitals and nearby operations have brought Gaza's healthcare system to its knees, as per a report issued by the United Nations Human Rights Office. The 19-page report finds Israel's pattern of deadly attacks on Gaza's hospitals. The report covers the period from October the 7th, 2023 to June 30th, 2024. As per the report, there were at least 136 strikes on 27 hospitals and 12 other medical facilities. It also termed Israel's repeated claims that Gaza hospitals were being improperly used by Hamas as vague. The study was revealed just days after the Kamal Adwan hospital was taken out of service after a raid by the IDF. It left the population of northern Gaza with almost no access to adequate health care. As per several reports, staff and patients were forced to flee or were taken to custody. The director of the hospital was also detained. His whereabouts are still unknown. Aditya, we are joined by our reporter Aditya Wadwan. Aditya, what is going on in Gaza and in regard to their healthcare system?
Well, Tom, if you see, UN has also said that the healthcare system in Gaza is collapsing. And as you rightly pointed out, recently the Israeli Defense Forces have had attacked, attacked this, taken hostage of the this director of the Kamal Adwan Hospital, Abu Safia. So as per the IDF, he was believed to be the Hamas operative. That is why he was taken into custody. And there were some reports that mentioned that Israeli defense forces were beating the injured patients in the hospital. And it all needs to be seen, because Israel for quite some time, the Gaza, this Hamas and Israel have been embroiled in a long conflict, and there are no signs of so far, that a proper ceasefire deal can be signed between the two sides. However, Donald Trump has said that if Hamas does not release all the Israeli hostages by the time he takes office in January, it will be a big problem. So the entire situation in this region is a little bit tense, and it needs to be monitored very very closely as to how things unfold in the times to come, because the attacks from both the sides have been continuing, and there's been no respite from the attacks. Yes, Tom, back to you in the studios.
Thank you very much. We are joined once again by Madhav Nalaput, the editorial director of the TSG. Madhav, what can you tell me about Israel's style of attacks on Hamas? Obviously, they believe that Hamas has tunnels under these hospitals, but it is a pattern which this report shows.
Look, back in the 1990s, you had an organization called the LTTE that assassinated Rajiv Gandhi, and the LTTE used the same methods as Hamas is using now, which is hide among the civilian population. Innocent civilians are used as human shields. So the problem is that, for example, when the leader of the LTTE, Prabhakaran, was taken out by the Sri Lankan forces, he was in a cluster of civilians, and a lot of civilians paid with their lives for the fact that Prabhakaran hid behind them. So the reality of the situation is that civilian infrastructure is being used by Hamas as, if I may say so, as a shield to protect its own cadres from attack. And the Israelis are out to finish off Hamas once and for all to ensure that October 7, 2023 never gets repeated. So it's very, very unfortunate that human beings have become human shields for some terror organizations. And the sooner this ends, the better. I think Donald Trump has given good advice to Hamas. Release the Israeli hostages and you have a chance of survival. You don't release the hostages, in Donald Trump's words, all hell is going to break loose on you. Thank you very much.
How could this possibly escalate further then? Netanyahu is now obviously considered a war criminal in the International Crime Court.
Look, I would like to say that I don't think the United States recognizes the International Criminal Court, and frankly, nor do several other countries. There is no means of enforcing any of its orders, except that the compliant governments enforce them, and they refuse to enforce them, the ICC can do nothing about it. So quite frankly, as far as Netanyahu is concerned, he has been caught by surprise on October 7 last year, and he's determined never to be caught by surprise again. So he's going all out to ensure that both Hezbollah, Hamas, as well as the other members of this axis of resistance against, may I remind you, not only the state of Israel, but the Jewish people itself. They call for an end to the Hamas charter is very explicit. Jewish people have no right to exist on this earth. So that being the situation, it's very, very unfortunate that's happening. And I repeat, it would be wise on the part of Hamas to minimize the damage to itself by releasing the remaining innocent hostages. And the sooner it does so, the better for Hamas. Thank you.
We've obviously heard reports directly from the Middle East of Israelis stopping humanitarian aid going into Gaza. We've had, I think, 8 people die now from hypothermia inside the Gaza Strip. What does this say about Israel's tactics?
Look, I'd like to again point out that if you check, for example, Fallujah, where the United States was involved and Britain was involved, the British were very actively involved in the Iraq war, the number of civilian casualties was infinitely more than what is taking place in Gaza today. There it was the British and American militaries who were involved, and a huge number of civilian casualties took place. I don't want to go back in history to the Vietnam War and the extent of civilian casualties, the use of Agent Orange and items like that. War is horrible. War needs to be stopped and outlawed across the world. Until that happens, we're going to continue this. And war and terror march hand in hand. So I'd only like to say, the sooner that the hostages are released, the quicker will be, in my view, the resolution of this conflict. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Madhav Nalapat, for joining us. We will now move on to some news updates. Investigators in South Korea have made initial progress in the probe into the crash of the Jeju Air Flight 2216. The cockpit voice recorder's data has been partially recovered, while the flight data recorder will be sent to the US due to extensive damage. The crash at the Muan International Airport on Sunday claimed 179 lives, with identification of victims now complete. Let's take a look at the report.
Investigators probing the deadly crash of Jeju Air Flight 2216 in South Korea have recovered the initial data from one of the aircraft's black boxes. Ju Jong-won, Deputy Minister for Civil Aviation, said on Wednesday that the initial extraction of data from the cockpit voice recorder had been completed.
사고조사위원회는 음성 기록 장치에 저장된 자료를 이미 추출 완료하였고, 오늘은 이 자료를 음성 파일 형태로 전환하는 작업에 착수할 계획입니다.
Ju said that the plane's second black box, the flight data recorder, would be sent to the United States for analysis as local investigators were unable to recover the information it contained due to damage it suffered in the crash.
파손된 비행 기록 장치는 국내에서 자료 추출이 불가한 것으로 판단됨에 따라 미 교통안전위원회와 협조를 통해 미국으로 이동하여 분석하는 방안을 오늘 합의하였고,
Jeju Air Flight 2216 crashed at Muan International Airport, about 290 kilometers southwest of Seoul, on Sunday morning, killing 179 of 181 people on board.
2025년 1월 1일 10시 30분 기준 사고 수습 상황은 다음과 같습니다. 신원 확인입니다. 사망자 179명 전원 신원 확인이 완료됐습니다.
Authorities have said that identifying the remains has been a slow and difficult process due to the damage done to the bodies in the crash. Bureau Report NewsX.
We'll now look at some news updates from the Indo-Pacific region. India's space ambitions soared on Monday with the launch of the PSLV C-60 rocket. The mission, called SpadeX, aims to test docking technology in space. The two small satellites will demonstrate rendezvous, docking and undocking. This technology is vital for India's future human spaceflight and moon missions. India is now set to join the ranks of Russia, the US and China with this breakthrough. The country's space program has been growing rapidly, achieving major milestones at a fraction of the cost of global powers. Azerbaijan's prosecutor confirmed that Russia has pledged to identify and punish those responsible for the deadly plane crash on December the 25th. The crash, involving an Azerbaijan's airline flight, killed 38 people. Russian authorities have not confirmed if their missiles caused the crash, but President Putin apologized to Azerbaijan's President Aliyev. The crash occurred in Russian airspace, and Russia's investigative committee promised to take action. President Xi Jinping has announced plans for a more proactive microeconomic policies in 2024. Speaking at a top political advisory meeting, Xi acknowledged China's struggles with a property market crisis and weak consumption. Beijing has already implemented several measures, including interest rates cuts and easing home buying restrictions. However, economists warn more fiscal stimulus is needed to boost domestic consumption. China's official growth target of about 5% for 2023 remains at risk, with many economists predicting it will fall short. Severe snowstorms in Japan's northern region have led to dozens of flight cancellations as millions travel home for the new year. Japan Airlines cancelled 42 flights from Hokkaido, affecting over 6,000 passengers. ANA also scrapped 14 flights, impacting 800 travellers. Long lines formed at Hokkaido's main airport as passengers sought alternative flights. Both airlines warned of potential delays and further cancellations due to the harsh weather. North Korean leader Kim Jong-un has overseen the launch of plans for a new beachside resort. The resort is part of the Wisconsin Karma development project in eastern North Korea. Kim called it a first big step in boosting tourism as the country reopens its borders. He expressed satisfaction with the resort's facilities designed to host key political and cultural events. Kim, accompanied by his daughter, toured the site, which analysts say is a key part of his vision for economic growth through tourism. A Philippine cargo ship sank in the San Bernardino Strait, killing one crew member and leaving two missing. The vessel, carrying 24 tons of cement, was hit by big waves off Samar Island. 11 crew were rescued overnight and another swam ashore after 25 hours in the water. A search for the missing continues while fishermen recovered one body near Biri Island. Russia and Ukraine have exchanged hundreds of prisoners in a deal brokered by the UAE. 150 Ukrainian soldiers were swapped for an equal number of Russian troops. US President Biden announced nearly $2.5 billion in military aid to Ukraine. Here is the full report.
Russia and Ukraine have exchanged hundreds of prisoners in a deal brokered by the United Arab Emirates. The Russian Ministry of Defense confirmed the swap of 150 Ukrainian soldiers for an equal number of Russian troops. Ukrainian President Zelensky reported that 189 Ukrainians, including key defenders from Azovstal, Mariupol, Chernobyl and Snake Island, had returned home. The exchange was deeply emotional, marked with poignant moments, as freed Ukrainians reunited with their loved ones in northern Ukraine. This was the 59th prisoner exchange since the full-scale war began and one of the biggest so far.
Ребят, я благодарю вас за службу, за терпение, за мужество, за то, что все перенесли. Мы очень рады, что наше Министерство обороны очень много работало за ваше возвращение. Наш президент очень переживал, и вы уже почти дома.
In addition to the prisoner swap, US President Biden announced nearly $2.5 billion in military aid to Ukraine. The funding includes $1.25 billion from the Presidential Drawdown Authority and $1.22 billion from the Ukraine Security Assistance Initiative. Secretary of the Treasury Janet Yellen also revealed $3.4 billion in economic aid to support Ukraine's government and infrastructure amid the ongoing war. Bureau Report, NewsX.
And that's all we have time for. We'll be back with more news updates from across the world.